week of their trip, and then they're all on their own. Isn't that great?
Sounds good.
So we do have a form at this point. Let me go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
Hi, Doug.
And Zoning Commission. It's Tuesday, October 15th. This is our regular meeting. Present, we have Suzanne, Doug, Jasmine, and myself. And do we have any to start off commissioner comments that aren't about the agenda?
No.
All right. Planning staff comments?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So currently you canceled your first meeting on the 5th of November because. Okay.
Yep.
And so right now we just have a meeting scheduled with you on the 19th. The code amendments that I was going to try and bring you today that I had to push off because I didn't have time to get it done.
Mhm.
I was pondering if I might be able to come to you on the 12th of November, but wanted to float that as a date to see if people would be available.
On the 13th.
Okay, so the 12th.
I'll try and do it remotely, but
Okay.
I don't know.
So the 12th is possible.
That works with you.
And I can follow up with an email, but I kind of just need to put it out
Yeah.
there and then I can follow up and get everybody's.
Yeah.
But if you're amenable to adding a meeting, it would still just leave you with the 2 in November, but it would make up for the 1 we lost. Okay, I'll be in touch. Thanks. I don't think I have anything else.
Great, thanks, Suzanne. And it doesn't look like we have any members of the public with us currently. So we'll begin our first agenda item, work session picking GMQS and TDR workshop with Suzanne.
Zach, and you're with us today. We're part of our team. They're both with Design Workshop, but I know you've seen other members of the broader team that's working with us on the Vision 2050 project. But as we've been starting to move some of the work forward, we'll talk more about the work more broadly. One of the things all along I knew about growth management, specifically TDRs as well. We are currently working on a task order to advance some of those recommendations from the growth committee specific to TDRs and growth management. And on each of the topics where we've had staff kind of unload all of their thoughts about various topics. So we, did that on growth management. We need to do this with the PNC. So that's really my biggest goal tonight, is to get you all, I provided that background information from 2020, which, maybe a starting place for you may not apply anymore. Suzanne, you're more recent on the PNZ or back to the PNZ, so may have, different visions of what scoring may have looked like in the past. Anyway, just definitely want to get your thoughts that we can feed through the design workshop team and onto some of the sub-consultants who are working on this topic specifically as they're trying to advance some of those recommendations. So along with that, we want to give you an update on where things are broadly with the project, and kind of, how these task orders are working. We're not necessarily bringing each one of these topics to you. We're having a focus group tomorrow about the floor area recommendations that came from, it's not something you engage in on a deep basis. We got our zoning people in on that one. But growth management is clearly a place where the P&Z has had issues, concerns, thoughts, suggestions, a lot of energy in the past. So definitely felt like this was a great time to check in with you all on your experiences, maybe less so on the TDRs specifically in terms of reviewing applications. Not that many of those come through you guys, but certainly to get any thoughts you have on the recommendations as we start to work on those. So anything I missed on my basic start to So I'm gonna toss it to Jessica to walk through some stuff, and then I think it'll go to Riley, and then we really just want to start in on discussion. And just so you all know, Jeffrey's coming. He had said he might be 5-10 minutes late. So, we should see him soon.
Great. Thanks, Suzanne. So again, I'm Jessica Garrow with Design Workshop. Thanks for having us. I'm going to give just a really quick overview of Vision 2050. I think this is, you've heard from staff in terms of updates to the comprehensive plan and things like that. So we wanted to just share where some of these code amendments fit into to the overall process. So coming out of the Community Growth Advisory Committee and direction from the Board of County Commissioners, we have kind of the overarching umbrella of Vision 2050 to update both the comprehensive plan and implement the CGAC recommendations through the code. Through that direction, we have a vision statement to implement bold climate action while balancing our economy, preserving our rural and wild lands, and supporting an equitable and affordable community. So tonight, a lot of what we'll be talking about fits in all of these buckets, but particularly preserving rural and wild lands as it relates to the TDR conversation. So always trying to kind of pull our work back to the overall vision statement. Steps or stages of work. We have completed the setting the stage. That was really working through with the consultant team, with the staff team, making sure we had clarity on the values that are driving the project and starting that scoping of the additional research analysis, community engagement that is needed for the project to move forward. So we're squarely in the building the recommendations portion of the Vision 2050 process. We continue to have meetings with the work group. So the CGAC has transitioned to the Vision 2050 working group. So we continue to meet with them. And as Suzanne said, starting our focus group process on some of those key recommendations. So this is part of just the overall landscape there. And then updating guiding before we then update the code. Any questions on this overarching process? I think you've probably. Okay, great. So we will then dive right into the specific topics related to growth management and TDRs from the CGAC recommendations. So one of the key recommendations coming out of the Community Growth Advisory Committee was this idea of creating predictability in the land use process and trying to simplify the process. One of the kind of initial conversations that the group had was understanding how many exemptions exist within the growth management system and how different projects are able to move through that with more or less review process. And so really trying to make sure that particularly for growth management, but also for TDRs, that it's really aligning with the county's values. So that's kind of the high level piece related to these two particular programs. They absolutely have a relationship to many of the other recommendations from the advisory committee's recommendations related to net parcel area, related to floor area, related to how do we address energy considerations, water considerations. So they have a relationship, but we're really trying tonight to them and your experience as the Planning Commission within these programs. So what I'm going to do, this chart was in your recommendations, and pause to see if you have any clarifying questions about the specific recommendations before we then get into the kind of bigger picture questions we have towards the end. So the first set of recommendations relates is, as I said, kind of maintain that GMQS as a tool, but really looking at it pacing for development, looking to revise this, reflect the goals that the county has and some of the goals that are outlined within the broader CGAC report. The other piece that I think was happening in the background and is now an important consideration are some state law growth within within a community. And so we're kind of keep high level is maintain this system, but maybe look at it more for new subdivisions. Suzanne, anything you would add on this set?
Just sort of back to that basic of always knowing that today growth management is new lot. Doug, you got your education through under sort of a growth management competition umbrella. And that, right, we were talking about keeping sort of that a quota, which is maybe a bad word now in the state, but the idea of some limitation rights for, and separating that out from the whole kind of game we play related to additional floor area, that would look like something different than the competition scoring system maybe that we've used to date. So, but I think just always kind of touching on that, like the separation between what is new lot parcel competition versus additional floor area.
District development is the one that I was involved in.
Mhm.
That's the things. And when we did that, they had come in to the previous, before the county had dealt, and they got points because they had deleted square footage or something. They were the only one also.
Mhm.
But really GMQS is for that talking about.
Right.
And to get those points on the existing process now, we talked about it then, was you'd have to decrease square footage more than they did.
Density off of 9250 versus the 15,000.
Get to the points to pass the
Right.
scoring system.
Understanding that we do so little subdivision
Right.
in the county. And when we do, it's something like that. We create one new lot, we create two new lots. We just don't see, I mean, the last, I guess, big subdivisions we saw in the county would have been, Highlands and the Moore PUD that were done in the county before they then were annexed to the city.
Well, what about, not caught up in this?
I mean, if
Someone
somebody
like that
is
decided they
wanting to
wanted
divide and go through growth management and obtain development rights,
That's the way they would. Is that correct?
That is
Right,
the
right.
process they would go through.
So I have a lot of potential.
Besides the fact that you have to convert to Catholicism and be baptized in. Never mind.
That's part of the, I haven't read the list yet.
Yeah.
preferred. So
Yeah, and so these next two recommendations get to what Suzanne was saying, which is separating out kind of growth management from square footage quota systems. And within the CGAC report, there is this idea and the size or less requirements. And so this square footage quota system would really probably tie into that and how you would maybe get additional square footage. Some of these special review criteria. So it's maybe affordable housing and providing some addressing waste, traffic. There could be others in terms of addressing environmental considerations, things like that. Any questions on that set of recommendations before I do an overview of the TDR recommendations?
I think that was the part that I thought was most important. They are really important because to promote smaller with a lot of carrots and discourage larger with lots of sticks would be my inclination.
and I just think to understand, I mean, even the way the system, and then there's all the exemptions we have. And, there was a point in time, I think even before I was with the planning office, so it goes back a long ways, where everything counted. we counted how much was happening everywhere to get to some number of this much, there's this much new development. At a certain point, we started doing incentivize the things we wanted, right? Of course, affordable housing is exactly growth management and, these things management. And somewhere along the line, we lost kind of that thread of, but they're still counting towards, so we put a lot of time and energy into growth management of what actually then there in the development that's happening that's exempted from that system. And what does that mean?
That may be too much of a tangent, and I want you thinking about it. I think the part about cash in lieu for employee housing, I think was never addressed. Is that right?
It was not specifically addressed. There were some recommendations related to housing that sort of focused on like secondary dwelling units, ADUs.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that there was anything so specific on cash in lieu. We do with the team to review employee generation numbers and kind of what that looks like. And so I think more information to come there related to housing mitigation.
And did the process that the growth committee go through change the general view about, it seems to me that in that process, my eyes were opened to how many employees are required for, say, a 20,000 square foot house. That we might have counted vastly differently years ago, even when large houses were being.
Quantify that to make sure that there's clear relationship and to whatever mitigation is required, and to really make sure that there's an understanding rate, 5 employees, 1 employee.
And it probably we were learning that it is.
Yeah, and so again, I think more to come there, but
Okay.
out of that committee's work was to make sure that the code reflects what's actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is a legal linkage analysis that has to happen. And so they're working in code that's clear. And I think they're still moving forward here in the next couple months.
Is it possible for cash in lieu ever to work?
Do you want to answer that? Or
For it ever to work?
Well, I mean, if instead of building the housing, you're going to give a check to the county, but the county doesn't have the land, can't find the land, can't create the land. And so right off the bat, you're underwater.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I should answer your question. To know that under the code today, it's an impact fee versus that I think was the original. Like the decision at that time of the VOCC was that was what we require as an impact fee. For anybody to say, I'd rather build units adds a process to it where you come to the board and say, I'd rather build a unit or provide you a unit, and you go through a process. The board has to accept that specific unit, but it was set up to be the impact fee is the path forward. And these were alternatives, I think, right? The growth committee was kind of going, oh, but wait, don't we want units? I think the times have changed that, I think that is part of, there's all of the employees
The
that are
true
generated
cost.
by these large homes.
Mhm.
And then there's another conversation of in the right place to try and push everyone into paying an impact fee versus, again, it's just that conversation, I guess, kind of does this over time. So yes, both of those conversations will move forward
they'll
through
move
this
forward.
process.
I think square footage is perhaps a proxy for how much the intensity of help necessary or whatever. And, but if there's ever been any thought about how another way to measure it is, because it really is a lifestyle choice. There's 5,000 square foot houses, huge staffs associated with them. I don't know if any other communities or if there's any square footage, and maybe square footage is the only way, but
Yeah, and I think they're for similar communities, but the point's well taken.
Thank you.
I think the only system, what I've seen over doing some GMQS scoring, it seems to me that the system is is being, and I don't want to say that's their job, and the consultants are getting very good at having I guess I would say, being very tactical about the way they look at the system and looking at the financials of it. And, you have a client and they want an extra 2,500 square feet. And they have an approach where they can look at and they can say, okay, a TDR right now is a 1.5 million, or we can take this GMQS application, we can go through this whole process, and then we can use this point scoring system to get you that same amount of square feet for half the price. And it seems to me a lot of times it's maybe hamstringing the TDR in the square feet through the GMQS application, where they would have in the same end result through the GMQS with two systems are competing against each other. And we need to first, myself, board, it doesn't give staff any flexibility to, it's very rigid, and the way that it gets scored doesn't give staff flexibility or the board flexibility to look at an application and say, yeah, I mean, technically you get the points for this, but this is sort of I've scored some of these where did very obviously, and there's like a couple examples, you get points for Ass Creek on a place where no one would ever go fishing. So, and we gave them those points for that. And that was some of the points that pushed them over the top. But you can say, hey, we're going to put a fishing easement, in Castle Creek, the top of Castle Creek, where no one wants a fishing easement there. No one would ever go fishing there. Never seen anybody go fishing there, but we granted them the points. Or there was a 2-year period where we got some applications where everybody was, and part of their program, fire department, an off-road vehicle.
Truck.
Yeah. And I had friends who are on the fire department. We're like, we're good. We have like 5 of these now. You know what I mean? But they're like, we're just like driving them around in circles, and they're sitting there and so Old Snowmass got one and Castle Creek got one. And then, and they were getting, and I'm sure they're cool, and it's great that they have enough equipment. But literally the fire department was like, we got enough gear. Thank you. But this, the application had that in there, and the planners were very tactical about the way they approached that. And they were not, and staff doesn't have the ability, or the board doesn't have the ability, it's very rigid on how those points are allocated. And so let's either have Z board more flexibility about how they allocate those points. And, if people are giving things to like a trail easement that nobody wants a trail there, or a new off-road fire vehicle and the fire department doesn't even want it, we should have sometimes those are the points that push a project and push the scoring over the top. And then you look at it in retrospect, there was the point where TDRs were worth, I don't know what they're worth now, but were more valuable, and they were at 1.5 and then 1.8, and then one sold for 2.1. And you look at that, and for that end product of what they got and the square footage, they might have saved, and that's a situation where you're like, I mean, I kind of feel like it's sort of hamstringing the TDR system a little. So not having the two systems compete, everyone the ability to look at an application and have a little bit more freedom to score it. That's
Maybe there should be a wish list every year. Like
Yeah.
what you want from Santa, what the county wants from
Mhm.
Santa if he's applying.
Great. And we'll get into more conversation here in a but I'll run through the TDR recommendations, which is extensive. We have 4 slides of TDR recommendations. So there are a number of ways, 8 ways, I believe, right now for TDRs to be created within the code. So the committee talked quite a bit about what are those, are they valuable or not? So an example is preservation of a historic resource. You can get a TDR through a negotiation process with Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioners. So others, such as the conservation PUD, where you're agreeing to preserve a large portion of a site, was one that the committee thought reflecting the values and the intent of the program. So there's a recommendation to look at all of those, but there were a number of recommendations related to the square footage that a TDR is equates to. So right now, there are TDRs that are created and a TDR. So the committee recommended that change. And when you request a TDR, when you go through that TDR process, instead of being issued a TDR that's worth 2,500 square feet, you can do 2,000 square feet, but issued in 500 square foot denomination. So you would get 4 500 square foot TDRs for each single TDR that kind of from today to the new system. So changing that denomination. And the thought was some people really maybe only want or need 500 square feet. And that will mean they can buy just 500 square feet as opposed to needing to buy 2,500 square feet. And it is worth 2,500 square feet. There's potentially a process for you to have that exchanged into 5 of these 500 square foot TDRs. So making sure we're not kind of taking that 500 square foot over to that 2,000 square feet. So that's one of the main changes. And I'm going to pause there before I get into some of these other pieces to make sure that made sense. See if you have any questions.
And I think one of the pieces there was obviously like it's doing what we want it to do. And so that a rural remote TDR would have more value than certain other TDRs. Again, that by doing that allocation of 2,000 square feet is actually comparing to somebody else who might only be getting a TDR for 500. So it was an effort to put more value on those rural remote TDRs. You have to kind of dig deep into the to like, so I was always thinking about it as they really wanted us to still look at that as that was where the program started. That's what we still, we value these other things, constrained sites and whatnot. We still want to allow those, but we want to make sure that we're still putting strong value on a TDR coming out of the rural remote zone so we can protect those properties.
There were also some recommendations related to the UGB. So one of these first ones is a subgrade floor area bonus that would require a TDR, so 1,000 square feet for a basement, and requiring landing of 2 TDRs there, the 500 square foot allocation. There's a kind of an asterisk there. When you get into tiering, there was this idea that maybe if you're doing a really big house, that actually requires 4 TDRs to be landed. So again, trying to support the TDR program as much as possible throughout all of the recommendations. Some, again, kind of adjustments looking at some discretion for BOCC. There was some conversation about limiting where TDRs could be landed and create some program changes. So sterilizing those rural and remote sites once that first 500 square foot is sold. So making sure that you've said you're going to do the TDR, you've gone through that process. We're now sterilizing all of the rights there, even if just one of the 500 square foot TDRs have been sold. And then trying to review the TDR market annually, continuing that process, but also trying to think through how is this achieving the county's goals and linking it back to the overall committee's work.
So I have a question. The 500 foot increments,
Yeah.
So someone would, they have a lot in a rural and remote area in Lanedo or at the backside of Aspen Mountain. They apply for a TDR. That lot meets all the requirements for a TDR, like it could be built on and has access and all those things, right? And they get it. They can then subdivide that TDR and sell it off in 500-foot increments, or how?
I think the way the PDR at 2,500 square feet, you know, what, I think of it more as you're getting multiples,
Right.
you know, and that you could, right. Again, we've always had the conversation about, it comes up regularly. Can we sell a portion of our TDR? Can we, I don't want to use the whole thing. Can I just use, so in this way, you'll get your TDRs, but maybe they're 500 square foot increments. So they can sell one to you and one to you and one to you for whatever your project is, if you're an eligible receiver site. But you're, you know, again, that it changes the game on the value of what today is your 2,500 square foot TDR versus that. And that's something, you know, we'll be analyzing the economic impact of all of those, you know, right. You know, I see it as similar to what we do today. As soon as you agree, I want TDRs, I'm not going to build on this, your property cannot be developed. And then you have now either multiple TDRs or, you know, whatever that is to sell.
But as soon as the first one is sold, or as soon as you
And that's the
So that's-
recommendation.
right.
What
I
I would
think-
say, mechanics of things, there will be some adjustments in terms of what makes sense for administering all of these
Right.
programs.
Yeah.
That wouldn't change the requirements that the county needs to grant someone a
We're still saying it works the same as today. You're zoned rural remote. You don't have to show that you can get there and you don't have to show that you have anything buildable. All you're showing me is that you're in rural remote. You have a legally created parcel that hasn't merged with somebody else. Because you're in rural remote, you're eligible. Whether you're hanging off the side of, you know, a mining claim hanging off the side of a hill, there is not,
I thought there were some parameters where you had to prove
only if you're a
that
very,
you could. build
only if
there.
you're a very small parcel, less than an acre.
Right.
Any other parcel, as long as you're rural remote, we made it. It's the one thing we do that's sort of simple. It's like, right, no, if you'd like a TDR, we can give you a TDR. You're going to record this against your property. It's never going to be developed. It's an administrative deal, but and it doesn't involve a demonstration of developability, blah, 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 blah. You know where I'm headed. Yeah, to do that.
Mm.
And so, and I don't see that changing for rural remote,
Right.
because again, the recommendation is
To
we still
extinguish the
want, we
development.
still want to
Yep.
encourage that.
how many have been granted so far? TDRs?
I'd have to pull up my numbers.
The number,
That's
Well, the total numbers probably in
400 or something.
300, 400.
180.
No,
Um,
I don't either. Like which document was it in?
I can get it for you pretty quickly,
okay.
but yeah, we'll come back to that.
maybe I was thinking about how many, I thought I remembered Matt saying served through the TDR program.
Yeah. well,
Oh,
But I was thinking, well, like 10,000 acres. thus
Yeah.
far.
it's a pretty big number. Yeah, it's probably about that.
Okay.
I'm gonna go through some. So one of a new type of TDR is that you can essentially create TDRs in two ways. One is how we do it rural and remote and some of those other options that exist in the code today. Small homes, the preservation of existing would be able to come in and say, I'd like to preserve my 3,000 square foot home. I'm going to sterilize up to whatever that's to sell off those property rights essentially, and they would be landed elsewhere. So that's the new residential TDR. And in the rural and remote area, we want to introduce something new there. Program that, as it was recommended by the committee, that I think we will continue to apply to full-time, could preserve their home versus a second homeowner who maybe would want to preserve their small home. They might not qualify. That's straight of standpoint. And so that's a conversation I think we'll continue to have. In terms of landing the TDRs, they would get landed equally. So if I'm a property owner and I have a rural and remote TDR and a resident, differentiate between those. So that was one of the big changes as a recommendation program before I go into the next sections.
Yeah, I mean, how are you gonna decide the exact parameters of, how, I mean,
We'll get
it
back to you
seems,
on that.
it seems like a real, it's slippery slope where there's, I mean, I'm just, right, when you were talking, I just started thinking about, you know, even if you made it 2,500 square feet, picking like Marble, Redstone, Lanedo, Old Snowmass are living in and are very happy with the size of that home and would qualify for this, which is great. But that there might not be the existing market to even buy that house or redevelop it and turn it into a huge house. You know, there's just there's a lot of
I
moving
think
parts
that
there.
would be the point, that you would agree as, let's
Yeah.
call it a local person,
Mhm.
a permanent local
Yep.
person, that you are going to preserve a property
Yep.
that works well for you now, and that you would like not to see, I mean, I
Yep.
know that dollar signs are all over the place, you know, if we hold on to this and we hold on to all the rights that we have,
Mhm.
then when we die, somebody else can turn this into another mega home right
Right.
here, and we can get tons of money for it. Or maybe you have the thought of, I love this community, I love it like
Yep.
it was, I love this house like it is.
Yep.
I can still get money
Yep.
from it for me and for my children,
Mhm.
but I have I feel an obligation to
Yeah.
my community to stop
Yeah.
the madness.
Yeah.
And to preserve smaller homes, which probably still will be worth Lord knows what in the future, instead of having every single home turn into
Yeah.
the mansion.
I mean, I like the idea behind it. I agree with the idea. It, you know, and the idea of the TDR system saved the whole entire backside Aspen Mountain. Could have
Yeah.
been 15,000 square foot homes. It basically saved, you know, 9,500 acre, you know, we kept this whole area from becoming you know, huge homes.
Yeah,
My only concern would be just in the details of have the ability to become a mega home, right? That
Mm.
and how that works.
But as it goes on, and Jessica will explain,
Yeah.
there's, the concern is a valid one, that what we're gonna do is create too many TDR, the backcountry, but I believe that the recommendations came up with other uses for TDRs that eliminated some square footages and those kind of things. And so we need,
Yeah.
and the reason that this really came about is, as I recall, is that when you looked at the amount of square footage that could be built on vacant land versus the amount of square footage that could be built 3 or 4 or 10 times bigger. And so the idea is.
That's where you're
we
gonna
need-
save
We need to save,
yeah.
we need to figure out a way to not turn every house in Brush Creek Village into 57.
Yeah.
Or, yeah, it came from, but your point was discussed, value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a great point, it's 1-to-1 ratio. It's once you reach certain threshold, this idea of tiering, that you have to land 3 TDRs or 4 TDRs to achieve 1,000 square feet of development.
So you can sell them, so to drive up the demand essentially. So if
Yeah.
somebody that wants to buy 2,500 square feet additional square footage needs to buy 10 TDRs or whatever the number.
Right.
Right. Instead of one.
That makes that makes it,
Let's try and save the
Yeah.
market.
yeah. And there is this push-pull, had a back Aspen Mountain that had, you know, wood burning stove, and like everybody used that, you know, and they just used it for in the summer for skiing, and it was really had no value. Like in the 90s, like up until COVID, it had no value to anyone other than that person. Building a, you know, 1,000 square foot cabin there and really making it a thing was very, very hard building conditions. You only had like a 3 that were that it was very hard to do. And that cabin only had value to that person. Maybe it was worth 250 grand. So it made sense. You're getting into a situation now where like the market for those cabins on the backside of Aspen Mountain, those tiny little cabin mining claim, to build it and develop it and build their 1,000 square feet and not extinguish the building rights and then sell it for $4 or $5 million. A TDR, you know, maybe right now a TDR is worth 1.5, or it's
The
shifted
last one.
to the point where forever, the whole reason why that system worked to get the TDR and extinguish the building rights than to actually build and flip it. So that's sort of the same dynamic with these smaller homes that is going to come into play with the value of all those TDRs, I would think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we've always known since TDRs were, since we began that the market was going to tell us,
Yeah,
and we couldn't
yeah, it's hard to
really
tell.
much, yeah.
Yeah.
But as we said, so what it takes someone that has some ownership in the community, you know, some billionaire, but I can get half X or whatever it is,
Right.
because I feel and allowing it to become, you know, something
Yeah.
we don't want it to become. And
Yeah.
so that's, you know, so it doesn't work. It's not a perfect system because you can't outprice the market. There's just too many people with too much money, more dollars than cents.
Mhm.
So you have to hope that there are people that in exchange for a smaller return as opposed to maximizing their return. That's the right phrase.
Yeah. I think so. I think we said that a few times. Really quickly, kind of final recommendations are, again, a little bit more on the administrative side. There's a strong desire TDRs to potential energy upgrades. And so having maybe some kind of requirement that once those TDRs are sold for these residential TDRs, that 10% of that sales maybe goes to energy upgrades. Potentially limiting the allotment of TDR sending sites for those residential TDRs, again, to try to promote rural and remote versus the residential TDR. Looking at the potential for an administrative fee on the sale of TDRs to help on the administration of the program, capture revenue from that program, and think about kind of real-time program changes that might be able to be integrated into the code as the program moves forward. So those are all things that we'll be exploring. Any questions on those?
My quick number restricted from TDR specifically, but over the life of tickets, of which 297 have been extinguished. I always say theoretically available on the market because some people aren't offering them for sale. So, but yeah, 9,500 acres. Some of that's, you know, the Harvey property, the big, you know, ranch properties that use that as a tool to help preserve. And
Mhm.
so,
good.
And through a little bit of our scoping, just so you understand what our team and some of our sub-consultants are working on these technical studies, and then we'll get.
Great, thank you, Jessica. I know that the kind of overarching data framework has been brought to the board in previous conversations related to Vision 2050 overview and the comprehensive plan, but really just wanted into this kind of overarching structure that we've created. So the BOCC tasked our project team with making an order to meet the climate action goals, and those goals were kind of in that far right-hand column of the recommendations that we just walked through. So in order to guide this work, the project team created the data framework, which is intended to guide all of the technical studies and policy development. The framework incorporates quantitative and qualitative metrics to consultants, so we can determine the different trade-offs and impacts of potential code changes. The framework is broken out into 3 primary case studies: relationships between code levers and outcomes, and scenario modeling, which are all driven by Pickens County community values. So right now, as we're working through our kind of
Excuse me, would you raise your voice a bit?
yes,
Yes.
sorry.
Okay, that's all right.
We're focusing on establishing existing conditions and benchmarks. And mentioned earlier, we've already met with staff and done a deep dive with them on their administration of the codes. We've gotten a lot of great feedback there. Our options for TDRs per the CJAC recommendations, which is some of which what Jessica just covered. And we're considering means for implementation and ongoing program management. For growth management specifically, we're also conducting a case study, looking at peer communities who utilize growth management systems. And these case studies will help inform our options that we're bringing back for our phase 2 for the TDR and GMQS studies. So these additional phases include that relationship analysis, taking into account the code levers and how they speak to Pickens County's community values. Phase 3 really dives into scenario refinement. So looking at all of the data across the studies that we're conducting for Vision 2050, the case studies to identify the merits of proposed policies, which will help us station specific to TDRs and GMQS.
And so I'll add just at the beginning of the meeting. These are really important pieces. What we've found is we want to make sure we get through that initial analysis, that kind of phase one analysis for all the different topical recommendations from the CGAC, and then really dig into that relationship analysis and scenarios to see how they layer on top of one another and what happens when you pull one lever, what does that do to the other? So we'll be back, I'm sure, here in kind of probably early to mid 2025 with some of those pieces. Okay, thank you.
Who are our peer, or have you decided who the relevant peer communities are? Or is that still in the works?
I'll say it's probably different for each study area. So as an example, EPS is supporting on housing, that housing analysis. They're looking at cities as well as counties. And so Breckenridge, Telluride, Steamboat, Jackson Hole, Teton County. And so looking at maybe a large list, again, making sure that the methodology that ends up in the code is very legally sound and has some good case studies. When we're looking at things like floor area ratio and net parcel, the recommend the city of Aspen does, but County Utah is one, Summit County, Colorado, another, and our sub-consultants are doing growth management. And I don't know if we finalized.
But I think in conversations with staff and just kind of working through initial discussions on how wide of a net they're leaning into, in other states, including
Maryland in particular is an area that has a pretty robust growth management requirements. So that's one that we'll be looking at.
What was the county in Maryland that we watched? I think having to do with TDRs or yeah, I think it was TDRs. So, do you remember that?
No.
Horse country.
Is it Prince George's? Does
No.
Prince George's County? do
Mm-mm. But I'll look sometime, or I'll ask Cindy when she's back home. She'll remember that.
So I think wanting to make sure that when we're doing those case studies, that we're thinking about places that are similar to Pitkin County, but also places where we can learn something. And so that's why, in particular in growth management, some of the Maryland examples make sense. They have very rural areas and more urbanized areas, and kind of thinking through how that works. So I think from here, we just really wanted to have a conversation with you. We started to talk through some of these pieces as we went through the recommendations, and heard already some of your biggest challenges related to growth management, but just wanted to see what your thoughts are here, and big challenges, things that you want to make sure we're thinking about as we move forward in the process. Do you have anything else to add, Suzanne?
I really rely on what the growth committee did, because they took so much time and took such a deep dive and took so long and then took longer and then took longer to look into all of these. And my experience from before, when I was on P&Z before, growth management competition was a big deal. I mean, it would start early and go late, and it was hard fought. And I never saw anything come through, I don't believe, that didn't have competition. And so I think the 3 or 4 that I've done now, this time around, I don't think I've seen competition on any of them.
Is that a commentary on the exemptions that have been created, that nobody needs to really needs to compete anymore? They can just buy a TDR or do an exemption route, whereas the check.
Suzanne, when you were on, was that pre-2000? Like you would have been on P&Z area? Like that didn't exist
Right.
before 2000. So the competition was all either, reg, or it was tourist accommodations, commercial, and again, I mean, some of those big projects, I don't know, were you on with with the Highland stuff, works like that.
A less mature community, and mature community like ours now doesn't have those kind of projects.
It's right, sort of people look at what's the value of subdividing my property versus keeping it as one big estate with a large, home. I mean, that's played a lot into, I think, those decisions not to subdivide, but right, it's just, it was
very different.
right. And when we first scoring for it, a lot of people did it early on speculatively because they were trying to retain the rights. So we had changed their base to 5750. And so a bunch of, I remember years, maybe there were 9 applicants in the pool. And I can't remember what our allotments are. Maybe there was just an example I can think of where suddenly in the past they'd been able to build 15. We said, you get 5750. Here's how you can get more. And they could compete without some commitments. And so again, it's evolved a lot in terms of what you see now for an additional floor area, but right, vision or creating.
Whether Wildcat went through that or it was just a show all its own.
Because they were the 500s, they were exempt from
Mm.
growth management, so they
Mhm.
did not have to compete.
Mhm.
So kind of if you were going to compete, you had to go above and beyond what the
Mhm.
code's going to require of you, and show it. I know for staff, one of the issues we have with scoring is kind of the way we go, what's a score of 0, what's a score of 1, what's a score of 2? One's kind of you meet the code. So a lot of go through the scoring,
Mhm.
meeting the code, and what is it that they really have to offer up to exceed that? So again, for certain applications, presumably for new lots or parcels, like, right, does our scoring system actually accomplish? We had some things about energy efficiency, but people could say they were going to do low flow toilets and a few other things and they'd get 2 points, and then we said, well, geez, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Walks into it or out of it feeling like there was a big value add
Mhm.
going through that process. So if we want to keep it, I think it's how do we make that scoring process seem valuable to the community?
I did. I wanted to comment on Suzanne's talk about P&Z for many years, and that same kind of situation happened. The more exemptions were created, the fewer people wanted to go through GMQS. And where in the beginning we would have added because there were more requests for more allotments than we had available, then there was real, I think that we have to be really careful about the kind of exemption. They haven't seen any real competition with 2 projects competing with other projects. The other thing that really surprised me when we approved one project recently, which was a residential subdivision, 50 square foot houses were going to be approved. There was nothing about employee mitigation. That's not even a category.
And that was taken when we did the housing impact fee, because again, everyone in the county versus prior to that, it only was applied, who was subdividing. So it was a very limited opportunity for us to capture. So we went with the impact fee and see it in growth management as an option to exceed that, to go beyond, but not in the main criteria.
But, if we're talking about criteria for growth, in my opinion, because it is an important factor in evaluating the effects of growth and its management.
So that might be something when we're thinking about revising the scoring system that gets considered to be added into that revision.
I mean, if our desired outcome is the creation or conversion of units to provide mitigation for those employees more attractive to the developer or a more desirable option, or at least an option.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else that the commission would want to see included in an updated scoring system?
So I'll throw out a few language in the code that talks about proportionality. And speaking of the brush truck, or again, sort of where we've ended up with growth management a lot is people committing to donate money all over the county.
Yep.
And is that accomplishing, what we had again, I think you have to set aside additional floor area because it gets particularly goofy there. But, thinking with subdivisions, like, is that, our criteria is what are you doing to improve not just your own lot, but your neighborhood or the surrounding area somehow. And we've ended up in a place where people go, well, maybe the easiest way to do that is to give money to WeCycle and give money to the fire department and give money to the Roaring Fork Conservancy. And again, I'd love to get your thoughts on how that has played out and right, if we think we're really getting a valuable project from that.
Yeah, I mean, how that, and I'm just going back through some old scoring, GMQS scoring stuff that we've done, with open space preservation, wildlife preservation, fire protection, how that scoring system is that 0, 1, and then the bonus point thing it's all so tough to narrow that down, and especially when you don't have any competition for the projects, right? I mean, my thought is there should be like, to create competition, I think there should be like a GMQS season, like football, like, like part of the year, like all the applications, they all come in, for like at one time, the applications have to come in at one time of the year and they all have to be done. And then we, for like the month of November or whatever, that's all we're
Right.
doing here, where it's not spread out, and the, like, whether it's Castle Creek Valley and hopefully, we'd be creating a situation where you're getting multiple applications for the same square footage and you're seeing them together, like side by side in the same scoring, the same
I mean-
meeting, and creating this like
Right.
very, very short window of time where we score these and do them so we can see them side by side. I mean, and I don't know if that would work, or how that affects, obviously, the applications or the clients, or maybe you do 2 a year, but like you sort of create some time period where there's some structure to it. And I know there is already,
Right.
but you would create like a very tight period where these applications get scored. And maybe that helps.
You're right. We have a deadline, once a year. And in theory, it was very secretive, and, the boxes of paper would show up in the office on the day of, and, nobody, but now it's all the same consultants in town. It's, the handful of people everybody knows. They're all talking to each other.
Yeah.
They know exactly what each one is
Right.
operative long before they walk in our door to know, can I meet threshold, and, what might I need? But, we're just not even seeing enough of them to, right. I mean, we had the 1 year where we had to not give somebody their whole allotment on Red Mountain. It was kind of shocking, but right, it's just, we don't see many people using that as the tool.
You didn't have the allotment numbers to give, so you gave somebody a partial allotment?
Mhm.
And was that it forever for that person? I mean, could they compete again the next year, or?
So the way it would work, because they had committed to some floor area reduction, but they could have come back and used a part of a TDR, or maybe, I guess, competed again to get the rest of it. But they were still held to that maximum floor area that they agreed to.
I see.
So, yeah.
And the whole system with the multiplier, I mean, I feel like it could be simplified and cleaned up, where you just, where it's a little more simple on our end, but also on the applicant's end. But
That was meant to weight it, wasn't
yeah,
it?
yep.
To say what's most important and what's least important.
Mhm.
That seems to me to be valuable.
Well, some of them, yeah, it's just how it's of these GMQS, some of these applications that, I've just found frustrating, just the confines of the system,
Mhm.
right? Of the application. Yeah.
As a group, do you all want to continue scoring these applications and having them go through that review process? Does that feel like an important piece? If we can fix the scoring and we can kind of fix those parameters, is that process important? Or is there any reason why things should be more of an administrative review, where it's tiered, of some things are administrative and other things go to a board level? And what's your just maybe big picture thought process on
I think
system?
it's important to continue it, probably because of my lack of imagination. It lets us again say, this is what's important, and the scenes, and whether it is effective or not, or whether it's a waste of time.
We got right. I mean, again, like I always say, nobody walks into here or out of here for a growth management scoring, and I think feels very satisfied. So that's why we really want to hear from you, like what would make a great project, and it deserved all the points it got, and the community got some really good stuff out of it. Like how do we get there? One of these, and we got another brush truck, and
Yeah, we got a trail easement to nowhere, wherever it's like.
I mean,
Well,
again-
I mean, how do we? I mean, I do think it's important this board does this scoring. I think it's part of our onus to score these things, and so I think that's important. I don't know. I mean, what does staff have any ideas when you guys talked about how to make this more competitive? How to
The one that I was involved in.
Yep.
Was, and I'd never done one, I had no idea, which was appropriate.
Yeah.
I
Right.
knew better. And then I was like, well, this is what they're offering. Now that brush truck is useless. What we want is we want a ladder truck, or we want
Right.
more. And I was told that day, I believe, we don't go back and say, well, the brush truck doesn't work for us. We want an easement on the Roaring
Yeah.
Fork, or whatever it is. So to make it more effective, and we can say, no, we don't think that offer is appropriate, because I don't, because it's a number thing, for money for the brush truck or whatever, you're done.
Right.
You're through the gate.
Yeah.
Where
Really.
instead of us being able to say, yeah, you got enough number of points, but what you got your points for is needs to be some criteria. But it seems like there was no, and once they put in there, as you said, everybody knows what the number is and you're done.
And part of that process is staff scores it. And we're really just confirming or denying staff scoring is how I've always
Mhm.
felt that process is. Part of that too is like Doug's saying is staff score CS, right? I mean, they get that. So they already know, unless we make some huge, shift change of resources. So you're like, they know they're over the hump because they already saw your scoring, and a little bit, the cards are kind of already on the table, and they do a process where, and I don't know if that makes sense to withhold sort of talk about it with staff together and use in it at the time, as opposed to and that might, we showed all our cards already, and rarely is there ever a big shift from staff scoring to what we score it, right? And so
Well, we don't want to end up with just a flashcard approach of you got this close, no, choose something else. You got this
Yep.
close. There has to be some sort of structure
yeah,
for a developer coming in.
yeah, no, it has to be clear and concise
Mhm.
for them, but they're also, like Doug was saying, like, then it puts us in a situation where we have there's a lot of these applications maybe where we could have got a lot better application with the ability to sort of,
But that probably happens if there's two people that are applying.
yeah,
It helps if there's competition. And I mean, it makes it very difficult for us too. I mean, we try and vet, like, they've offered something to the fire department. Obviously, then the
Yeah.
fire department comments on it. When it's open space, I mean, again, if they're offering the fishing easement, whatever, like, then they'll give some pushback. I mean, they definitely have in the past. We're trying to have but again, in the end, when it comes to us and like I have to attach a 0, 1, or a 2, you as the P and Z have sort of that flexibility to go, no, this isn't good enough. And how does that play out if you really do have 5 applicants in front of you competing? Because you live or die on what you presented, and that's fine. But again, it's at best it's awkward, but.
And I don't think I've ever seen open space and trails come in and say, no, we don't want that trail. We don't.
Them say, we'd rather have this. And like to the fishing easement thing, I mean, look, they're in those lines, or yes, this would be a decent access point. But
It takes competition to make
Right.
this
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what it comes down to.
and mission for it to work. And
Mhm.
they're, because of the exemptions, because the certainty of buying a TDR, which is essentially an extension to the discussion we had at the growth committee, was, we go through GMTS, is you just buy a TDR and subvert, the whole thing, the time, the whole.
development. And so you guys saw the subdivision for the Jabaz, family on 7th Street. They were using TDRs for initial development, right, versus growth management. But again, each TDR is 2,500 that property is going to have to come up with multiple TDRs, to make that happen. Obviously, the numbers probably make a ton of sense for a lot in town, but it is, even at that increment, it's multiple TDRs to get to some floor area that somebody thinks is reasonable.
To you in one way is how effective do you think are they specific enough? Do they change anything? Is there anything in there that you think just is not workable? Or do you see things that you really think help?
I think that as we've taken a step back and gone back and looked at the recommendations, there's a lot of specificity on growth management.
Yeah, I can see that.
And that's
in your
part of
answer.
why we're asking, again, the headline is make the process simpler, get rid of all the exemptions, and we want to protect rural and remote TDR things. And so our charge with sub-consultants is to really look into what are some of the details. And so in it, and it sounds like yes, and I think we would agree, but we need to create clearer criteria, flexibility, trying to find a way to have competition. And I don't know, that gives us enough to start to look at what are some of those potential options. And again, we will be back with you in 2025 in all likelihood with, here are some focus group to learn more from some local community members. So we'll be back more. This is a little bit more of a blue sky conversation. What do you think, what works well? What do you want to change?
I think part of it is it says growth management, so the part of having the name sound like it's doing something when it's not
And
challenging.
And it's also part of that recommendation. I think we're still working through what this looks like of a square footage allocation system.
Which is actually
And can we move to that?
methodology to grow.
But what standards would you use? I mean, would you be back
I don't
in?
have an answer for sure. I mean, about the growth committee, 5750 was never addressed. That number is too big. Should go lower, creates more room for a TD, never even discussed. I was surprised.
Well,
And I was a
don't-
member and I could have brought it up, but nonetheless, 5750 is big.
However, don't you think the tier system addressed that?
I think the tier system is excellent, yes. I
Mhm.
agree. I think the tier system needs to go, was started at 35 or 3,000 or something.
It's like 3250,
3250, okay, yeah. so
I
the
thought
tier
it was
system-
even lower than that. I thought it was
you know,
something like
And that
26.
brings up the residential TDR program and all of those things. But then we're counting on people doing the right thing, sort of, because the value of the 5750 is more probably than the tier. And saying, yeah, I'm gonna get rid of about 1,000 square feet for a little bit of money and keep my house at 3250, but I have 50, so. And maybe it doesn't work. I guess I just fucked myself into a corner because if you allow it's less, then there's not any that you can sell. But
Right.
anyway.
I mean, the idea, right, is to try and create incentives for people to do less than
Yeah,
the 5750.
and to make it, when you get to the highest point in the tier, overall, this may be exaggerating a bit, but as I saw it, when you got to that top tier, if that's the amount of square footage you wanted to develop, and you somehow managed to live through the competition, whatever it is, then you had a good chance of your great-grandchild's first son being able to develop it. That's how long it would take.
Yeah, no, I thought that creating extreme difficulty and expense in the tiers was appropriate.
Yeah, I did too.
And some of the conversation that we're also doing the floor area and, sort of thinking more about that right sizing. And in my mind, it's a lot of the small lots out there that, right, there shouldn't be an expectation of 5750 on every lot in the county, even if you're postage down.
7,000 square feet in Redstone, give them a TDR.
We're using the lights. So
Just make sure it's
in front of
red.
you.
You missed that.
And I comment on this slide. So, I guess thinking out of the box, what if the board scored and staff didn't? What if staff just said, you've met a minimum threshold and we'll submit you in for P and Z scoring? So change the system. And what if the scoring list actually reflected current community values, right? So we have a survey every year, whatever that is, but my list would be wildfire insurance, open space, transportation, and community solar. So, we sort of dole out checks to recycle and that's fine. And there's the tools become a way for you to make your annual donations to the nonprofits over a TDR. So even if a TDR is trading at 2 million and you pay 2 million for GMQS, the net cost to you is 60% of that because you're in the 40%, 2 million in value, right? So, and I'm not opposed to that. I think it's kind of a cool side of TDRs has meant people have found crafty ways to go in through GMQS. So I just, it's been an observation and everyone's like $1,000 by donating through the GMQS process to a 501c3. And then, I guess the other reform would be, how do we make this? And, if you think, why is someone using GMQS? It's time still, right? It's 60-day shot clock. Is it something that makes it even more advantageous to go in through this route? So
Why would you, what is the downside first?
I was just saying, shake up the ball, right? Shake up the snow globe a little bit, like rather than just take all the pieces. We've scored several competitions where, and it's funny because both staff scores it and the applicant scores that their own applicant, if it's a competition, you've submitted a bid, right? You've submitted a dollar amount you're willing to pay for square footage, and then you're subjecting yourself within 60 days to P&Z scope. So I was making it a competition as opposed to you've already walked in, you've met threshold.
Go back before that.
Yeah.
Just simply, why does their score
You have 3 applicants walking in that already meet threshold, that are below the square footage in that time period. So we're basically just watching 2 allocating that. It's not a competition. It's already been won, right? They walked in and they met threschhold.
So
So-
otherwise.
But
wouldn't
again,
it be-
always ours is a draft.
Yeah, yeah, I know, no, no, and then
when you
resubmit.
get them, you're kind of like,
Uh,
do I really disagree
Right.
strongly with staff?
Right, right.
Or not? Or if I messed with one category, is it really going to matter in the end? I mean, that's
Other minutia, and you're like, wait, it's not going to change when you walk in the door. It's a foregone conclusion. If there's 5,000 to be allocated and there's 5,000 asked for, we'll end the evening with 5,000 allocated after 4 presentations, 2 by staff, 2 by the.
Through the conversation, it should P and Z score, not staff.
Again, it was just
Yeah.
like, I don't know if I'm right, but it was like, wait, that
I think
we
you can explore and bring back to you all.
I mean, what we're really discussing is there's something so uncomfortable at subjectivity, right? If you think it's been approved, it's it's the postage stamp that had a utility pole over it. And it was, a quarter mile from a rockfall zone, and the guy got a TDR, and you're like, what? It's a subjective, it's the utility poles. Like, bury them.
Yeah.
So it's, to me, it opens up a more creative conversation, and potentially, if you can make it time bound and then guarantee X amount of square footage, it adds some interest to the subjectivity again, which it doesn't. Jay Bigos only got 428 square feet on Red Mountain. That was the most interesting GMQS application in 7 years.
Yeah.
And he came in 3rd and didn't get his full allocation. I'm just saying, shake it up.
Yeah.
But again, what's the 500? And there's a value in this marketplace for that. And as long as we can guarantee something that's time bound, right from an approval and development process, cool. I'd come in for my 500 square feet. And here are the rules to play by. And we've updated the rules to reflect today's community values.
Substantive part you said is subjectivity, and that's what.
What we're scoring against, I think we should look at again, what is the list, the attributes that are so important to the community that when an application comes in from a subjective standpoint, you're like, oh, they have, right? Don't want to give you points for that.
we don't
Well,
need a 0 that says I don't meet the code,
Right.
because nobody walks in
Right.
the door and doesn't meet the code.
Yeah.
You've
I mean,
avoided a steep slope. Awesome. Like, you've
Yeah.
reduced the height of it's a shed roof. Awesome.
Maybe the more site specific based on where the square footage is being allocated. Like maybe if it's a very high wildfire danger zone, maybe somebody's just doing it out in the middle of nowhere where they're 50 miles from a tree. Or, I remember one, like the reduction of visible mass, right? Is like, it's up to 6 points. Like everybody just, when they score themselves, they're like, we made a berm, we got 6 points. So we pat ourselves on the back. And there's just that feeling, like Jeffrey said, that the system is being gamed, and that that the planners have a very tactical way that they're looking at this and how much TDR costs, and that when they come in, there's not a lot of leeway on our end.
But,
Yeah.
but are you saying we don't get what we want?
I think rarely, what we even need, like maybe we cycle area in a place where now I bet if, where no one has access to but the system is forcing them to come up with solutions that they don't need based on the way the points are allocated. And they're forced, and maybe those guys are like, we're good on brush trucks, like we're totally good. And so you got to put a square peg is driving out. I would be really interested in, because if the TDR system where it breaks the TDRs down into 500-foot increments is if that happens, that's going to have a huge effect on because then you have a very simple, like if you can just go to someone who owns a TDR and say, I just want 500 square feet, right? To build a garage, to build a add-on, and you don't need a full TDR, and you can just get 500 square feet, which is great location. You don't have to put your risk, whether you get the 3 bonus points for your trail system network. You just know that you can go there, and you know that if right now the current value of a TDR is $900,000, then maybe you can get the 500 square feet for 200 grand, and that's just a known fact.
But I think what's not known is that, right, there would be a whole different system behind that,
Right.
because it's not, oh, I'm in the urban growth boundary, that means I get to use the TDR
Right.
just because.
Right.
And, right, it's, well, how big are you? How big are you trying to get? Like, that may be, you need 3 TDRs to get that 500 square feet, or
Gotcha.
you may, again, there's a whole changes on
Different
that
system
side
of
as well.
Yeah.
That again, and that's all the additional floor area piece
but
would
what
all
it-
be pushed that way.
Whatever those changes are, and however technical that is, it will definitely, I would think, have a negative effect on GMQS competition, because you're the 2,500 square feet, whether you need it or not. and it's $1 million or 900 grand, and you can say, all right, we're gonna, like Jeffrey said, we're gonna do this, we're gonna be able to donate to WeCycle. We're gonna be able to, now you can go back and just pluck the square footage that you need out of the TDR system. You know, yeah, it's like making it more competitive is, I don't know, I just don't know how you do, it's pretty.
Would be, please correct me if I'm way off, that if it's 500 square feet that you can buy, because the TDR system will have changed, TDRs will be directed in
Yeah.
different ways.
Mhm.
And so giving that guy 500 square feet.
Yeah.
We have said in the advance.
Push that development, right, yeah.
Mhm.
Yep.
But I don't know, it's, somebody in that process referred to it as playing 4D or 5D chess, and it was that complicated.
Yeah.
So I've moved to this next set of, and kind of final, some of the things that we've talked about of a new square footage quota system that focuses on that additional square footage above the 5750. I think Doug, you bring up a good point of, look, when it combines with tiers, should that be above just kind of thinking about growth management is about lots and development rights, and a square footage quota system is about the square footage that you get to build. Just kind of like
Above 5750.
above 5750. Some of the things that we've just talked about, are those some of the same considerations you would want, that we're getting things that are real community benefits that meet the existing need, that there's clarity in kind of what that scoring process is, things like that? Any?
I think that that's going to be, and that was a number that seemed like it was difficult to ever define growth maybe. How many square feet are available each year and everything? At least I never understood. X number of square feet available above 5750 county a year, and then you're going to have a square footage competition. If people are going to want more than 5750, then there's going to be competition, whether they get it with the TDR or through BMP. If the TDR, if you buy the TDR, eliminates any quota. It doesn't create competition. It doesn't slow down any growth.
It seems to me that the tiering system is a very important tool. I mean, that stood out to me all through that process as, and that really does something. If you're going to build, I think you were saying the lowest number is 36. I was thinking it was there. Do you remember what it was?
I think Jessica, I mean, I think
3250
3250 was,
Is it?
yeah.
But it's a lower number, around 3000, and then tier 2 is 5750. And tier 3 is anything above that.
And what the growth committee was saying it gets significant. It doesn't just get a little bit harder. It gets significantly harder possible when you go to tier 3.
And so when you think about that tiering, it could be that you have a petition, system, right? That it's both, that just like your base level of entry is some number of TDRs. I think that was part of the idea of that tier 3.
Mm-hmm.
Then it really is a growth management.
Mhm.
Growth in defined square footage.
Just have to find a way to talk about quotas and not use the term quota.
Slots.
Yeah.
Lots of details. I'm going to really quickly just move us to TDRs. We just had a few questions on TDRs, or just anything that you want to raise about your experience, right? And what would you want to see incorporated into a new program?
I think a lot of the stuff in the growth community is really good. Costs more than, you don't get 500 square feet for sterilizing the things from that discussion.
I would,
Sorry. 500 square foot. Breaking 500 also was important.
I'd love to see what the issuance of the TDR, if it is something that is acre lot, it's 160 acres, it should receive its 4 TDRs. It shouldn't be a one-year process. So for LDCPs and the other, remind me, clear cut, we're still doing 2-step processes, and some of these have gone on for a year. Over, what's the one that went on for a year? The family that bought, some of it was open space, some of it was TDRs, it was constrained lots, it was visually,
Urbanese.
Urbanese was more
Oh.
straightforward. Over in the Crystal, over off of, sorry, I'll go
Oh.
back to the point.
Someone
No, it was a young family that moved over from Steamboat to Ranch.
Oh, Turnabout Ranch.
Yeah.
About
Oh,
Tybar.
that's,
Tybar.
But it was of TDRs, subjectives being either scenic view protection or visually constrained, or some of the others that require story poles and some other stuff. And it's like, well, build a smaller house. Like, we shouldn't have to give you a TDR off. It's a plotted lot. Every lot doesn't deserve 5750, given the constraints that we described in land use code. ones that take a year's worth of staff's time and the applicant's time.
If all they'd asked for were the subjective TDRs, it would have been a lot
I'm-
faster. The redoing the entire subdivision.
Yeah, no, no,
and
no.
Everything
No, no,
else.
sorry.
like,
Again,
yeah.
it's much like in the GMQS scoring, there's an angst or something uncomfortable. I think there's something, again, I don't see what the community benefit is of not seeing a 2,000 square foot house from Prince Creek Road, right? The sort of, think about what does it mean for a well-developed county? And where do we want to, every day of the week, but do we offer the same financial reward for sterilizing something that was platted before the 2006 land use code changes? Sorry, I had to say that out loud. Thanks for.
My thinking,
Yeah.
the 500 square feet addresses a lot of the concerns and why some of those take months in front
Right,
of the
right.
BOCC. You know, again, because it's the 2,500 square foot heartburn, you know, if they can start talking about the 500 square
Yeah.
foot TDR, I think that changes a
Yeah,
lot,
not disagreeing.
you know.
Yeah,
Will it mean people are less apt, you know, who knows, but
I love, support, enjoy it as a conservation tool. I don't understand the subjectives, but we're going to give you a TDR to sterilize it because you can't build a big house. And that's what I feel like the conversation's become over the past couple of applications and years. Yeah, I'm sorry, come back here.
Right.
You know, like, again, when you look at, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there 131 of 197 TDRs were for rural and remote, and everyone in this room be like, that's awesome. And it's the other 7, you're like, not, you know, that square footage up on Red Mountain, or sorry, transferring it to Red Mountain.
And I think Doug, again, right, you guys, a lot of those go straight to the board, you know, to ask to be a constrained site. You know, again, a lot of those are set up to just go straight to the board and not come about the creation of sending sites versus, you know, landing. And right, and landing sites, if you need approval, go. Not the best tools.
That's the TDR program needs to be improved. And I think there was something in the GSC.
Yeah.
About rural and remote TDRs versus other ones.
Every other
how-
TDR.
How they're
Yep.
allocated, but yeah. I know that there's angst about giving TDRs for non, you know, for whether they're equitable. Things there.
Yeah, like a lot that could never realistically be developed on in any way at all. Right? But that's a whole other, there's a really good, the one TDR thing that I think would help staff and help everyone. And I know you said this about defining landing sites, like sending sites are very well defined and landing sites are not as well defined. Would that be a good, it's a little more like, you know, they're a couple years ago, the paper did an article on TDRs and they have this map I'm looking at and it shows, you know, in green where the TDRs were sent and in red where they landed. And you can obviously see, you know, there is some pattern, right, where you're looking at where they landed in a lot of the spots you know, they're all being created on the backside of Aspen Mountain or in Lanedo or in very remote areas. But then you're seeing a lot of these areas where they're landing right on top of the sending sites. Like there's overlap there. Like the idea that a TDR would come off of Little Annie and then just land up Castle Creek by Elk Mountain Lodge or, you know, in the same caucus, that's a little concern, you know, now if it comes off of Aspen Mountain and lands on Red Mountain, that's how I think everyone envisioned the program, right? And to have it, you know, to have there not be, to have there just be a little bit more definition on where they can land, I think it would be helpful.
Or having it used in a different way, applying it in a different way.
Yeah.
For a different purpose.
We could try to answer your last 2 questions. I guess Hannah Hunt's slides from last P and Z were incredible at identifying some of the frictions in the valley in terms of growth. And so the ideal TDR program or the ideal growth program or the ideal square footage program would do a better job at, I think we use the word of pacing growth, but I don't feel like we've ever achieved it. You know, we have a terminus to a an allocation, but it's 6 years out, or they come back and they say, oh, I guess if we re-envision what does transferable development look like, how do we make the place we're living is getting busier, and I'm afraid of listening to Elizabeth in a couple weeks and talking about 20, it's closer to 3 here. So how do we align our tools with the desired outcome? I guess that's sort of like answering the last two in one. I fear what's going on at the state level, and how do we use the tools that we're currently allowed? That's another way of saying growth. The allocation and the growth pendulum, if you will.
Are you seeing TDRs only as a growth tool, or are you also seeing TDRs as used in a completely different way to put? I can't remember the
No.
ways that the growth committee, but what I
Yeah.
hear you saying right now is it only has to do with growth in square footage and the dangers of where it can occur, but not for other community purposes, to meet other community goals.
I would say take my first comments were around, the TDRs that we truly enjoy allocating to an applicant, like that's preserved in perpetuity.
Yeah.
We as a community can truly value that open space, that water, that fish and made, and the 360-degree radius. That's such a cool use of transferable development.
Yeah.
So I'm clearly aligned. I'm clearly, trying to argue alignment with the preservation of open space and concern. I think it's the same as the board conversation, which is then the concern is the 4 TDRs are 10,000 square feet back on Red Mountain with 25 trucks from Elam. So it's a question of, we've created this tool. I know there's in its landing, but yeah, I guess, again, I don't know how to answer the last two. I'm trying to figure out, how do we envision a place where we pace growth that's aligned with what we want as a community, preserving and protecting open space to continue to protect the rural values we want everywhere else. And the caucuses have spoken, right? The Woody Creeks and the snow caps have said, no, we really don't want a landing.
This committee specific about how the other ways that TDRs could be used to meet community goals? And do you remember 2 of them or 3 of them?
So are more related to square footage and how different square footage is accommodated on a site. And so it's, if you are a house of a certain to get to the same kind of overall square footage, it's in order to do certain kind of basement developments. So it was really tied to the square footage. It's not, it didn't include recommendations like, in order to meet a parking requirement, you can land a TDR. It's real site as square footage and it can get landed, but you need more TDRs to have the same amount of square footage.
Don't always tie it to square footage. Let's use it for, it didn't get more specific than that.
I think that's an aspirational statement that's something the committee is interested in, if you would be interested in exploring that. So in this moment, we don't have an answer for what else those might be. But I tie it related to energy requirements. And so that's why there's some of that to energy improvements and things like that. So I think more to come as we look at those additional ideas.
So that underlines your concern again, not underlies, but underlines your concern again. Well, if you could, maybe we could get somewhere. Silence. Sorry.
I was going to tell you, you need to come up with suggest some good people to put in their names to be on the PNC. That's coming next.
Yeah.
No, this one's in decisions as a citizens board that are just spectacular.
Yeah.
So no, I'm giving my last couple of, I'm going to do this again. So this is,
Good.
I'm really interested and fascinated to see what you come up with. And again, I'm scared to all heck as far as what's going to go on at the state for the next 10 years, 20 years. So, and like we have this incredible set of tools, and I think it's amazing that we're having this broad conversation and doing the deep dive, if you will, to figure out, okay, how do the tools work for the next 25, 50 years? So, but it's a,
Slide said you go to Darby with 30 to 40% growth in like 25 years, and Dickens 3, Dickens rating square footage.
Yeah.
Because all these homes, they're monster homes for square footage growth, for population growth. And it's going to be economic segregation, whatever you want to say. But that's really another question is are the benefits that we're going to get from trading those things, open space and all those kind of things, are they worth the cost, which is monster homes and billions? That's the trade-off I think that they can is. I mean, I'm struggling with the trade-off. So I think we're working for.
And so in a separate meeting, Jeff is about to update the energy code, I think, for the 3rd time in less than 3 years. So he's got his own cycle of ICC updates, and but it's aligned with what you're saying, which is he's basically saying put up or shut up. He's saying, like, do you really believe in energy reduction, energy use, energy consumption? And if you do, here's some code updates for you now and then. And it's fascinating because it really is. I've never seen a part of the country update energy code 3 times in less than 3 years to maybe the community's chagrin, but then you look back and you go, wow, those were pretty cool then, or whatever, wherever you were on some of these things, but those are pretty cool decisions at the time. So I would say, and I'm assuming you're plugging, yeah, I mean, they're fascinating controls, existing households, but then you're like, wait, 80% of the households already exist, whatever the build out is. And so if we can retrofit 80% of our consumption, that's pretty awesome. My house and get away from my boiler too. That's pretty, pretty cool. Sorry about my digression.
That is great. And we will be back and really quickly maybe run through our next steps.
Yeah. So we have coming up on October 30th, that is focused on the comp plan and really kind of the themes that are driving the development of that document in order to solicit feedback from the community and help kind of drive, I think, goals and kind of more finite work towards the development of recommendations for early next year. We also have a work group meeting coming up, which we will also be kind of reporting out on the comp plan workshop, in addition to some of the updates that are occurring under the energy code updates and our work on the parcel and FAR. And then we'll collectively, project team staff will be back on the 19th for the next.
What population will make up the workshop?
So community workshop is open to the community. It's a community open house from 5 to 7. I don't know if invites specifically to P&Z have gone out, but it's on the calendar. We do also have some what we're calling breakout sessions that day that are focused on those planning theme areas. So for instance, there's a planning theme around kind of water, utilities, environment. So we're making sure that folks who are involved in that sector are part of a conversation. So that includes kind of regional partners, community members, things like that. So I don't have the details off the top of my head. I want to make sure is invited, please send that information their way. And we're doing advertisements as well in the newspaper, Aspen Public Radio.
Feedback. Like this would be, do you want AIA and ASLA and USGBC? Like, what would you like to fill the room? I guess the other way of asking it.
So for the, we are working to engage the caucuses through the process. So caucus representatives have been invited to join the working group, and staff has been doing some individual onboarding with those. And we've gotten, I think, Suzanne, really pretty solid.
Yep, almost all of them
Yeah.
covered now.
Nice.
Yeah.
Or a representative from each.
And then the
And
staff-
go back to that slide for just a second. Work group meeting, does that mean what was the?
The evolution
That's the new name for the CGAC.
Oh, that's, okay.
Yeah.
with the caucus reps added in,
With the what?
with the caucus representatives.
Oh,
added in.
okay.
And that meeting is down in Basalt at the new CMC space, Mortgage Commons room on November 13th. And we are on an every other month cycle with that group. So our next meeting with them will be in January, following November. And then I think we just had a QR code. That's the website.
So based on the CGAC recommendations, the project team has assembled a tracker, which will be updated throughout the course of the project. But it's a place that you can go to kind of see where we're at currently. As we continue to move through our technical studies, I think we'll have a lot more information to share in there. But for now, it's a great kind of depot in addition to the webpage, Vision 2050 webpage and the county website for kind of all Vision 2050 related items, meetings, engagement opportunities. So
Yeah. So thank you. We know we took maybe more time
Thank
than we
you.
expected, but
No, thank you.
really appreciate the conversation.
Yep,
Awesome.
thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
You use AI note taker?
No.
You're the AI? Yeah.
So I think that's it. I'd take a motion to adjourn.
Copy that. Support the plan.
Done. Adjourned. Right. Thanks, everyone.
Although we're adjourned, I would highly suggest this book, if you haven't read it. You can get it free at a, good, thank you.